Welcome, Dan. Thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here.
When I heard that there was a possibility of getting you on, I was very excited because I've seen some of your work that we'll get into. But before we do, please introduce yourself.
Sure. So, Dan Richards. And today I spend the bulk of my time teaching in a variety of programs at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. But before that, I did that, I was very fortunate. I tell my students sometimes in life it's better to be lucky than smart because I kind of more through good luck than planning fell into the financial industry and through the 90s, rode the wave, built and sold a couple of businesses, was recruited to be CEO of a public company by some former clients that I helped turn around and then led the sale of. And so I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have kind of had, a successful career. But as I said, I think often in life, it's good luck rather than good planning.
Well, that sounds like an amazing journey that you've had. When I looked at your biography and some of the work that you've done, I was very impressed. And I do want to speak about some of that. So you had a role where you took the CEO position of a firm, where I believe it was 5 different firms that were merged into it. So can you tell us a bit about that and what that experience was like?
Sure. That was a challenging time. It was 2002. And so for those of your listeners that have been around for a while, remember 2000, of course, was the height of the tech bubble and then followed by the tech burst. And that was a very challenging time for lots of people in the tech space, but also many investors who had gotten over-enthused, and some advisors that have gotten over-enthused about the promise of the tech space. Because, of course, at the time, we knew it was only going one direction, it was only going to go up forever. And what that led to was so the firm that I was recruited to lead, Cartier Partners, had acquired 5 mutual fund and life insurance dealerships kind of at the peak of the market, made commitments in good faith, but that they just, because of circumstances, couldn't deliver on. And so I was recruited, to kind of help right the ship. It was a challenging time, but we were phenomenally lucky. We had a great team and, staff that worked incredibly hard under tough circumstances. And we also had some outstanding advisors who, we all pulled together. And, through a tough period, we're able to kind of solidify things. And then ultimately, our principal financial backer, which was the Caisse de dépôt and placement in Montreal, made a big investment, new CEO, change in strategy. And so I was asked to, after thinking we were going to then kind of be able to once we'd built the foundation, move to growth, my mandate changed to lead an exit. It became part of Dundee and then part of Scotia.
Wow. That sounds amazing. And the reason I started with that is because I'm very, very fascinated by the tech bubble, particularly about how people dealt with the aftermaths of the tech bubble. And so I do want to dive a bit into that. We've just went from this belief that the stock market only goes up and technology stocks can do no wrong and everything is on the web now to zero.
Right.
Like, how did the advisors that you were managing at that time, how did they deal with it? What kind of conversations did they have to have?
Well, so it depended on the advisor, it depended on the client. And in some cases, advisors were being thanked by clients, because the advisors had said, look, yes, we know that tech is going to go to the moon, but, we should maintain a diversified portfolio. We look at valuations. And so in some cases, clients were thanking advisors for kind of reining them in a little bit. One of the things that it's the hardest thing when it comes to investing is to maintain your emotional equilibrium, to keep the highs from being too high, the lows from being too low. And that's, by the way, true in many, many aspects. I'm dealing with students right now who are looking for jobs in some cases. Same phenomenon, right? It's a bit of a roller coaster. So coming back to your question. So in some cases, advisors had reined clients in. In other cases, advisors had gotten caught up in the same level of enthusiasm. And it was very tough. There were some very challenging conversations, for sure.
Definitely. And I think that goes back to that relationship building aspect of the advisory business. I always say that the cornerstone of the wealth management industry is the relationship, because the reason these advisors are so successful is because they're able to have trust with their clients, and then who are willing to give them their assets and refer them. And so to hear that obviously there were some advisors who were more prudent and who realized that we can't put all our eggs in one basket, as the popular saying goes. I feel like that's a philosophy that's sort of holding true and seems to hold true through every event that we go through when it comes to the markets and how volatile things can be.
Look, one of the things that we know we can learn from history, right? It's not an exact parallel, but there are lessons from the past. And I think one of the things that a good advisor does is able to bring context and perspective from what's happened in the past. And I remember talking to advisors who had to rein clients in more than once. It wasn't just a tech bubble. We've been there before. You think back to 2007. So again, after the tech wreck, we'd had kind of a big bounce back. It looked like real estate, was going to go, straight line up forever. In the U.S. especially, we can, if you recall, that's when we had the subprime debt, kind of no credit, no problem. That didn't happen in Canada,
Right.
But in the U.S., and I spent quite a bit of time in the U.S. talking to U.S. advisors. And again, you had clients that gotten carried away. Some advisors got carried away. So I believe that one of the real benefits that a good advisor provides is being able to say to a client, yes, it looks incredibly positive, but let me point out to you periods in the past where people have gotten carried away, and here's what happened, here's the price they paid, here's the regret. So I'm going to encourage us to exercise some caution. On the other hand, at the bottom, so you think back to March of 2020, oh my God, the world was going to end. We forget that we had that sharp, steep decline, and many investors were panicking. And again, advisors, not always successfully, right? Ultimately, it's the investor's money. You have to be guided by their decision. But the good advisors, I had one advisor who got a call from a client who wanted to basically sell all of his stocks, go to cash, because he'd read something or seen something, the world was going to come to an end. And the advisor said, look, ultimately, it's your decision, but I really want to meet and talk about this. Don't want to do it over the phone, want to meet in person. And ended up driving an hour and a half to meet with the client to have this conversation. They had a long conversation. At the end, the client said, okay, thank you. Let's just agree that we'll lighten up, but much less than I wanted to. And let's review it again. That was the advisor's suggestion. Let's review it again in 30 days. And of course, 30 days, we'd had a big bounce back. Client would have missed that if that advisor hadn't made that commitment. That's the kind of commitment that exceptional advisors make.
I completely agree. And advisors are known, well, not all, but most advisors are known for going that extra mile for their clients because, again, they end up developing very close relationships. Now, you brought up March of 2020 and the madness that occurred there. And I feel like there were a lot of things in the markets that were happening. And personally, I used that time period to buy as many puts as I could for a while, which was interesting. But I do want to speak about the client side and what we saw during that period, which was the rise of this sort of new type of retail investor where it was, you know what, like, we're locked down in our homes. Let's just trade stocks. It's something that we're interested in. And people had a lot of, I've spoken about the meme stocks before, but there were people that had genuine conviction. And there were people who felt that, this was sort of their time. It was time for them to get into the markets and to show that they can also make gains. And so I want to speak about that from the consumer behavior perspective, from the retail client perspective, in terms of what you witnessed and if you feel that there is still staying power, and if those clients will move towards the advisory side, or if they'll stay on the DIY or a hybrid.
So, that's a great question. And, I'm incredibly fortunate to spend, the bulk of my time dealing with MBA students in particular. I teach in other programs, but I spend most of my time in the MBA program. My students typically are mid-20s to mid-30s. And then I talk to recent graduates as well. And so I kind of have a window into a generation that's much younger than my friends and I are. And we do have some conversations on your question. So let's provide some context, first of all. There was a ton of attention to meme stocks, GameStop most prominently, but not just GameStop, AMC, BlackBerry. The amount of attention media coverage was way out of proportion to the actual amount of dollars that were involved, right? You take a look at the market cap of GameStop at the peak, trivial, right? Rounding error in the scale of things. So I think the first thing to always remember is let's step back and provide some context and perspective. That being said, this was the first exposure to the stock market for many young investors. And, I think that, it wasn't a great experience for many of them. For some of them, if you got in early, great. But for many, it wasn't a great experience. And I think you kind of have two responses. One of them is, well, okay, that was a fun ride and need to keep doing that. Others, though, said, okay, all right, this was not a good outcome. So maybe I do need to get some advice. Maybe I do need to reach out to somebody who can provide some perspective and guidance. One of the challenges, though, is that, and that we perhaps talk about this, is that it can be hard if you've got $25 or $30 or $50,000. It can be hard to find an advisor sometimes who is able to give you the level of attention that you need and want early in your career. And I think that's a challenge for the industry and for some younger investors. But coming back to your question, I think it depends. Some investors may get turned off, the market or advice. Others, this was an object lesson that will maybe set them in the right direction.
I agree with you. I feel that this was an opportunity for a lot of people that normally may not have been exposed to the market to get some exposure. And there were some that did well. There were some that did not do too well. And there were those that, of course, just sort of tried to follow the trend and didn't really know what they were doing and just threw out whatever they could.
Right. Look, I think the real challenge is that investing can mean different things to different people. For some of those folks, it kind of felt like, oh, this is like, an online casino, right? No, I mean, you laugh, but that's what it felt like sometimes.
Yeah.
And we know that you may get lucky. You may do well if you take that stance in terms of investing. But if you do well with that approach, it is luck. That's not a sustainable path long term to creating wealth.
I agree with that. And I think that definitely lends to your point about young investors when they're early on in their careers or when they're just starting to save, having difficulty finding advisors. And I think that's where the robo portfolios come into play, and where the sort of do it yourself but with guidance programs that are offered, because those individuals, as they may want to participate and they may want advice, but again, as you mentioned, like it's just not feasible at that level for an advisor to take that individual on as a client. But I do think it is very interesting when we speak about sort of the psychology of the younger generation and what they're growing up with and what their expectations are. So you have forces outside of the wealth management industry that are setting expectations. And I am speaking about the Googles and Amazon and Netflix, where they've come to anticipate your needs. I've said this before, but Amazon seems to know what I want before I want it. And so if you are now to have a relationship with an advisor, your expectation would be that they should be aware of what I want. I mean, they should know me. They have all of my money. And why aren't they reaching out to me and saying, hey, I think you need this right now?
So let me address that a couple ways. First of all, you raise a great point. I think that people are conditioned by, our experience more broadly in terms of our expectations. And you're right. I think that investors are, in many cases, particularly younger investors, not just younger investors, but especially younger investors, saying, like, why isn't my advisor reaching out to me because, I'm thinking about buying a car, and, they should know that. Right? They should know that from the searches that I make. Well, we've got some privacy issues here. But that, I think, speaks to one of the core attributes of a good advisor is really starting by understanding what are the client's objectives and being able to, everything comes back to those objectives. What are your goals? And everything is rooted in those. So if an advisor is able to identify that you've got a couple, and let's suppose one of the things that they want to do is help their kids, put a down payment together for a house, let's say. Well, so an advisor could, kind of check in, with those clients and just checking in to see where you are on your thought process here, wondering whether there's something we should think about. So rather than waiting for the client to call you, you can have kind of the process in place to be able to check with them. That's a small example, but it stands a powerful example, a powerful signal to those clients. But I also want to come back to another, just side comment. I think there is a tendency to make sweeping generalizations among kind of our Gen Z. All right, under 25 investors is, kind of glued to social media and just focus on immediate consumption, no discipline. Well, I'm sure that's true in some cases. That's always been true. But, I had an eye-opening experience. One of the courses that I teach is actually to art students. This is a business certificate program that U of T offers to students taking arts programs that want to take 4 business courses, get a business certificate. So I teach a marketing program. So I have 300 art students. So I had somebody from CIBC Visa come out and talk. And then we went to Q&A. And most of the questions, to my shock, were about credit scores. And I think about when I was 19 and 20 and 21, would I have been asking about a credit scores? Don't think so. Mm-hmm. So, you do have many young folks who are asking the right questions and starting to think about, kind of the right issues.
I agree with you. And I feel like part of that is because they are getting exposure to so much more. And so something like a credit score is something that they're aware of, because if you want to buy anything, the first thing to check is your credit score.
Or rent an apartment. Or forget buy something, right?
Exactly.
They know, that generation knows one of the things the landlord's going to ask, especially in a hot market like Toronto, they want to see your credit score.
That's very true. And since we're speaking about your classes, I was very fascinated to learn about you utilizing GPT-4.
Right.
So can you tell us a bit about what you're doing with GPT-4 and what it's been like?
So, on November 30th of 2022, so coming up to a year ago, that'll be a day that we'll look back upon and say, that's a day when everything changed. Because that's the day ChatGPT-3 was released. And we went from AI saying something, okay, maybe someday, to holy moly, it's here now. And so since then, I've been integrating ChatGPT-3 and then now ChatGPT-4 into some of my courses. And by the way, with mixed results, right? Mm-hmm. One of the courses I teach is communication. And so I have teams of students who will draft emails or cover letters or requests. And then I'll give them a challenge, and then we'll get GPT-3 to do it or GPT-4 now. And it's horrible, right? It's long, it's cumbersome, it's too florid, it doesn't look natural. You say, okay, what the heck is training it? However, what's interesting is you then give it some prompting. You say, okay, could you make it shorter, less florid, less formal? And it actually ends up being pretty good. So one of the things that I'm working right now on, I mentioned this course for, intro marketing. And so right now I have some of my teaching assistants that are working on loading a private AI network. So not tapping into all of the info out there. So loading my PowerPoints, my lectures using speech to text, an open line, open source textbook, and they're loading that. We're going to be testing it before we release it to students. But the goal is to make it available to students to ask any questions. So all of a sudden, any questions students have, they can put to it and they can immediately get a response based on all of the lectures, all of the course material.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So you're essentially creating your own chatbot so that students can easily get their questions answered with and having been in uni, I know there's some that can even be shy sometimes to go to approach a professor and ask. So the fact that you now have all of this, I think, is amazing. Now, so right now I understand that it's just your coursework, so like PowerPoints and different texts that you hand out,
but also lectures, right?
And lectures.
Everything students get in the course is going to be available.
Right, but I was just wondering if you're planning on adding additional material. So like if someone were to come up to you and ask a question pertaining to what they're learning, if you would perhaps take that and then add it in there as well.
Absolutely. Because, I think I do this now. So when I get a question from a student, I post the response in an announcement to everybody in the class. So everybody in the class has a chance to see a question that got put to me. But I see over time that, you have the potential to kind of have every year, kind of a richer body of content. And so it becomes a better resource.
Right. Well, I definitely see why you keep getting nominated as a top professor.
Right.
Now, I do want to, so we were speaking about ChatGPT 4, and I want to speak a bit about AI and ML as well, particularly when because before that we were speaking about advisors and clients and the fact that there is a lot going on within those relationships where there's just no capacity for you to be able to provide all the services that are needed or to anticipate all the needs of clients. So what I've been seeing a lot of, and I feel like it's sort of like puzzle pieces right now where everyone's trying to figure out the right approach and the appropriate way to implement some of these tools. But it would be to have essentially AI go in and just look over all of the client portfolios and look over all the client notes and details, something similar to what you're employing in your coursework, and then just be able to pull out important details and say, hey, your client in the last meeting seemed like they were interested in purchasing this new car. Maybe you should touch base with them to see what they've done.
Right. So, look, I think that I, by nature, am a bit of a skeptic of hot trends. So one of the courses I teach is FinTech Marketing and Strategy. It's an MBA elective. And a couple of years ago, and I focus on a few verticals. I focus on challenger banks. I focus on consumer banking. I can focus on online lending. We talk about robo-advice, wealth management. But we don't talk about, and we've never talked about crypto. And the reason principally is that I dug into it. I had trouble understanding it. And I'm kind of with Warren Buffett that if I don't understand something, don't want to talk about it. So I had a student approach me and say, so where is crypto in the course that you're teaching? And I said, well, actually, we talk about all these other verticals. We're not going to talk about crypto in this course for that reason. He says, oh, so you're teaching dinosaur fintech. And I said, okay, I guess so. So, I don't regret that decision. That when you take a look at today, I think that my students were well served. That being said, when I look at AI, and I look at blockchain, and ML, this is real, right? This is going to be transformative. It's not going to be a straight line up, right? I was at a conference last week, and one of the speakers was a senior VP at one of the big tech firms, and he talked about let's do a real world test here. Let's imagine, and this was real time, put up on the screen, went to ChatGPT 4. Let's imagine we're at Tim Hortons and we're asking for advice on the optimal location for a new store. So put in that request, instantly, right? In a flash, gets a response back with amazing pace. Optimum location. It's the corner of King Street and Queen Street. And if you're in Toronto, you know they don't cross. So
Yes.
hallucination, which is what this is called, is real, right? Today. But, and that's, by the way, why the AI platform that I'm having my TAs work on for this course that I teach is a closed AI platform. So the content is only the content that I put in.
Right.
So that I don't have to worry about hallucination, hopefully. Unless I was hallucinating in one of the lectures, different story. But the point is, yes, there are going to be bumps in the road, but this is going to be so transformative. Let me give you an example. Out of pattern behavior. So if you're in business to business, running large enterprise sales, one of the things that you do in your CRM is your CRM establishes a normal pattern of behavior, and then your salespeople are automatically prompted if there's out of pattern behavior, if it's above or below the expected behavior. And in both cases, as a salesperson, you contact the client, whether it's above or below the expected pattern. Well, the same thing can be done now with AI in terms of individual clients. You see a change of behavior of any form, and whether it be spending, whether it be saving, whatever it is, and you're able to then reach out to that client, say, just checking in, just curious to see how things are going, was wondering about this. Mm-hmm. And that prompt, I know there are lots of issues so I have no tech background. I'm fundamentally a marketing guy. And so marketing guys say, well, of course it should be easy. We know it's never as easy behind the scenes. That's one of the things that keeps CGI in business. But nevertheless, as a marketing guy, yes, that's what we should be able to do. That's what advisors should be able to do.
I agree with you. And it's actually really interesting that you say that, because I'm not sure if you've heard about open banking. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you have. Yes. But open banking is something that we've been expecting for a while. And it seems to the deadlines keep getting pushed and pushed. And part of that is because of all the complexity that's involved with that process. But that would allow for this type of monitoring that you just mentioned, where if you have everything connected from your debit cards to your credit cards to your financial accounts, you certainly have this very comprehensive and holistic picture of what's happening, and it's very easy to track. Now, as you mentioned, there might be privacy concerns. I may not want my advisor to be aware of everything that I'm purchasing or what I'm purchasing or where. But again, there's that give and take balance, right, of what you want and then what you're willing to sacrifice to attain that.
So let's come back to your question on open banking. And let me share my view. First of all, I think as Canadians, we have a great deal to feel good about when it comes to our financial system. I'm not sure open banking fits into that category. So open banking, been around for a while. I think really started in the UK, but it's now spreading to many other developed countries. And essentially what it does is it gives consumers access to all of their information and gives them the ability to give another provider permission to get access to the information. That also facilitates the easy movement of accounts or other lines of business. And so what it does, it promotes competition. And of course, if you're a successful incumbent, you may not want to make it easy for customers to move their accounts. Mm-hmm. And so Canada is at the back of the pack when it comes to open banking, compares to most developed world. And some of it is, I think, a regulatory stance. So fintech, financial technology, is an area where Canada is lagging. So there was just a report by one of the leading research firms called CB Insights out of the US. They did a global survey, and they published a list of the 100 most promising global fintechs. The US had 43 on the list. UK had 16. Germany, Netherlands, France had 4. Canada had 1. Happened to be a firm out of Winnipeg called Conquest Financial Planning.
Yes.
Founded by Mark Evans, and if people know Navit Plan going way back, I actually have a call with him later today. But One. Netherlands, with half our population, has 4. We have 1. And I don't think we can feel very good about that. Well, it could have been 0, could have been worse, but no. So you look, I think some of that is maybe the innate caution of Canadian entrepreneurs, but we also have a regulatory regime, and every regulator, when it comes to banking, has to make a trade-off between openness to innovation on one end and risk on the other. And you can say, okay, we want 100% risk, so there is no innovation. Okay, great. In the short term, there is no risk, but there is a big price down. And it feels to me like when it comes to things like open banking, the regulators in Canada have tilted so far towards risk aversion that we are at risk of Canada falling behind, specifically around innovation and building global platforms in financial technology that are going to make us competitive.
I see your point, where you earlier on brought up what happened in the States with 2007, right. The subprime mortgages, no credit, little credit, everyone's approved. And the fact that you can put down whatever you wanted because no one was verifying or checking it, right? And we didn't have those types of issues in Canada because we are more prudent, and we do have more regulatory oversight. And so I would say that our regulators have done a great job in protecting us. But to your point, I will say that it seems like sometimes they just throw up too many hurdles in the name of protection. Right. And we do need to go back and evaluate, okay, does this actually provide protection? And is it what you're gaining in terms of protection by being this prudent? Is it worth what you're losing? The opportunity cost, is it worth it? And I feel that's not an exercise that occurs often. But I will say that in our case in Canada, as far as open banking is concerned, they are sort of letting the incumbents compete a bit and try to come up with some of the rules. And also, we do have the benefit of seeing what's been done in the UK and Australia and these other geographies, and sort of piggybacking off of that, right? And saying, okay, this is how well they've done it. And now we can learn from them and we can try to do better.
Absolutely right. So let me provide some context. I just had a conversation with some students about when it comes to launching new products, are you better off being a first mover or are you better off being a fast follower? And so, there are lots of examples in the tech space where first movers prevail, sometimes between what I call network effects, where you're able to build a massive customer. So for example, eBay, Facebook. Well, actually, Facebook is a great example of not being a first mover. Before Facebook, there was MySpace, there was Friendster, and what you find is that often in the tech space, the most successful companies were not first movers. Whether it be Google, whether it be Apple, whether it be Facebook, you name it, right? Microsoft, different story. They were a first mover. Most of them are fast followers. So you can be successful as a first mover. You can be successful as a fast follower. Where you cannot be successful is a slow follower. And it feels like that's where Canada is today.
No, I agree with you on the slow follower. That is not where we want to be. And we definitely need to figure out a way to become more innovative. And perhaps it is time for even the government to help along with that, right? To create some new programs.